Welcome back, JD Parker students. Today is the 6th week of virtual learning, and it is Monday, May 4th, our 25th day. We are continuing onward with our 8th unit here, which is fractions and decimals. Here is an overview of our 8th unit, and it goes into 3 standards. You have NF 3.5, 3.6, and 3.7. NF 3.5 reviews taking a fraction and now working with a denominator of a tenth or a hundredth and even adding those together. And NF3.6 is now taking that fraction and changing it into decimal form, and again working with tenth and hundredth only. And then 3.7 is going to be comparing those decimals and ordering them from least to greatest, greatest to least. And we will continue onward with all of that. Today, we're going to review Fridays and Thursdays. Independent assignment here. You did this on Thursday, the front side of 9.4, and on Friday, you did the back side. So I did notice in your work, a lot of you were not taking into account the word and. So when you are doing reading the directions, it wants you to write the total amount in money form, then write the amount as a fraction, or a mixed number if it's greater than 1, and then write it in decimal terms. So it actually wanted 3 different forms for these here. So pay attention to that word and as you go down through your assignments, because if you only give me 1 and it wanted 2 different forms, then you only really got half of it correct. Okay, so the first problem they did for you, and you have nickels here, which are all 5-cent pieces, which ends up being 5 3 times is 15 cents. And here you have 3 pennies, which ends up being 3 cents. When you add your 15 and your 3 cents together, you will get 18 cents. Now this means you have 1 in the 10th place, and you have 8 in the 100th place. In fraction form, it would look like that. 1/10 means it takes 9 more to make a full whole, but 8/100th means it's going to take 92 more to make one whole. So here you have 1/10, and 1/10 can also be written as 10 over 100, which is an equivalent fraction. So basically, now you can add 10 and 8, and you get 18. 18 hundredths and 18 hundredths. And it is 18 cents. Here you have a quarter. That is 25 cents. I have 1, 2, 3 dimes. That's 30 cents. And I have a penny. That's 1 cent. Now looking at these, I know it takes 4 of these to make one whole. It's going to take 10 of these to make one whole, but it takes 100 of these to make one whole. So here I have my 25. I'm going to add my 30 cents to 25. So I'm going to count up by 10s, 25, 35, 45, 55, plus 1 is 56 cents. And that is the correct way to write it. If you're talking about hundredths, 56 cents. This is the cent sign is telling you you are already talking about parts of a dollar. So you do not put a decimal point when you're talking about cents. Coming down here though, if you use the dollar sign, there were $0 and now there is 56 cents. So it's not quite one whole dollar, it's less. And then the next way would be in fraction form. So if this is 56 cents, that means I have 56 out of 100 cents. And that means I also have 0 ones, 5 in the tenths, and 6 in the hundredths. 56 hundredths is the same thing as 56 hundredths is the same thing as 56 cents. And the next section says to write the money amount and as a decimal in terms of dollars. So you have 25 hundredths. So the money amount would be $0, because if there was a hole here, it would be written right here. The whole number would be right there, and that would also be called a mixed number. This is just a fraction, and it's less than 1 because the numerator is smaller than the denominator. So here we have 0 holes, but we have 25 cents. And written in decimal terms, it's going to look exactly the same, minus the dollar sign. So 25 hundredths is the same thing as 25 hundredths with a dollar sign, which means cents. Here we have 79 hundredths, 79 hundredths, and 79 hundredths. Here you have 31 hundredths. $0. Remember, the holes would be right here, and there is no holes, so you can just write a 0. And this is going to be 31 cents, and 31 hundredths is how you can write that one too. Here is 8 hundredths. I notice a few of you are getting confused where to put that 8. Think of it like this. Here is my tenths. Here are my hundredths. So some of you are telling me this is like 8 tenths. And it is not, because there's 8 pieces out of 100. If you were to call this 8 tenths, you would tell me that all this is filled in all the way up to the 8th part, which is almost a whole. 8 tenths is not the same thing as 8 hundredths. Here's 8 hundredths. And I went a little bit too far there, but you can see 8 little pieces out of 100 is much different than 8 tenths. So in order to keep this in the hundredths place, you need a 0 in the tenths place right there. So there's no holes, like you can see that they didn't write any, so you leave that as a 0. So this is 8 hundredths, which is 8 cents, or you could even write it without the dollar sign, which is also 8 hundredths. And then you have 42 hundredths. That's a 4 in the tenths place and a 2 in the hundredths. There are 0 holes, 42 hundredths, 42 hundredths. And now you have it now in dollar form. They want you to write the money as a fraction in terms of dollars. So they don't want you to write the decimal. It's really already in decimal form. If you got rid of the dollar sign, there's your answer for decimal form. Dollar form, decimal form, dollar form, decimal form. They're the same forms. So you just need a fraction. And a fraction means you use a fraction bar. This is 87. There are no holes, so I'm not going to put any holes here. And I mean, you could put a 0 there, but you don't need to, because they have a 0 in their holes. So you can have a 0 in your holes here. 87, and it goes to the hundredths place. This is not going to be tenth because there's a 7 in the hundredths. And how that would look would be 8 tens all the way over 8 tens. You have 2 pieces left in your tenths. And then 7, which means I would just have to back that up and get rid of one little spot here. Now I have 7 hundredths. So this is a visual of that. I have 8 tenths, 2 left over, 7 in the hundredth, and if you add them together, you get 87 hundredths. And if you think about it like this, you could go ahead and break this into hundredths by drawing it out, making sure you cut it into 10 pieces. I'm not exactly sure if I did. I think I have 9. By drawing it out and make sure you have enough pieces cut, you would have 80 pieces, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You would have 87 pieces. That's 8 tens, 7 ones, and then you would end up with 87 hundredths. Here you have 3, and it's in the hundredths place, which tells me there are no tens. So if we were to do another one of these, there would be no tens for this. 0 tenths, 0 tenths. Here you would need 3 little of these hundredths pieces here. So I'm like coloring 3 of these little 1 blocks here. And that is a visual of that. There are no tenths. There's just 3 of the hundredths. So I would write that 3 out of 100 pieces. Here we have 66 hundredths. That would be 6 tenths and 6 in the hundredths place. So it looked like that. Here you have 95 cents, 95 hundredths. And here you have 1 full dollar, just one. There's only one here. So you could write this fraction, actually, you could write it just as 1 whole. You could write it as 10 over 10 or even 100 over 100, and you can keep going on as long as the top is the same as the bottom. You have 1 whole because this says 10 pieces are colored out of 10 possible pieces. So the whole thing is colored in. This says 100 pieces, which means I would have to color in 100 pieces out of a total of 100, which means I colored in the whole square. So when it is $1, it is just telling you it's 1. So the correct answer is just 1. Now, write the total money amount. Okay. Then write the amount as a fraction. Okay. And as a decimal. So first we're going to have our money. Then we're going to have our fraction. Then we're going to have just a regular decimal. So we have 2 quarters and 2 dimes. 1 quarter is 25. 2 quarters is 50 cents. Plus 2 dimes. That's a 2 in the tenths, which tells me it's 20 cents. So 50 plus 20 is 70 cents, not dollars. So make sure you put a dollar sign, a 0, and then a decimal point. And that is telling you you do not have a full dollar. There are $0 here, but you do have part of a dollar, and you have 70 cents because 50 plus 20 is 70 cents. Now 70 cents is the same thing as 70 hundredths because it comes out to the hundredths place value. If you wanted to drop that 0 and say 7 tenths, that would be a correct answer, but you would have to also drop that 0. Remember, whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. Whatever you do to the top, you have to do to the bottom. So if you wrote 7 tenths, that is okay because that is the same thing as 70 hundredths. And then writing it as a decimal, we have 70 cents. So you have 77 tenths or 7 hundredths. Now we have 3 dimes and 4 pennies. 3 dimes is 30 cents. 4 pennies is 4 cents. 30 plus 4 is 34 cents. So here's my dollar amount, 34 cents. Here's my fraction amount, 34 out of 100 cents makes 1 whole dollar. And then here is my decimal point form, which is the same thing as that minus the dollar sign. 8 nickels, 12 pennies. So 8 nickels, that means I got to count by 5 cents 8 times. Well, I know 5 times 8 is 40 cents, and now I'm going to add 12 pennies, which is 12 cents. 40 plus 12, that is a 52 cents. So there is your dollar form, 52 cents. So to make a whole, remember you need 100 cents. We have 52, which means it is 52 out of 100, or it is 52 hundredths in decimal form. Kate has a dime, 4 nickels, 5, 10, 15, 20, and 8 pennies. Write Kate's total amount as a fraction in terms of the dollars. Well, she has 20 plus 10 plus another 8. So she has 38 cents. And in fraction terms, it would look like this. 38 out of 100 cents makes a full dollar. Nolan says he has 75 hundredths of a dollar. If he only has 3 coins, what are the coins? So this would be, of course, 3/4, because here's your 3 coins and they're each worth 25 cents. So 25, 75 would be 3. If you have not learned how to count by 25, I suggest you do that because it'll make your life easy in the long run. So you have 25, 50, 75, a dollar. So 3 coins that comes to 75, it would have to be 25 plus 25 3 times, which is quarters. So what are the coins? Quarters. On the back side, we have more here with the lesson. It says number 1, which of the following names? Which of the following names the total money shown as a fraction in terms of dollars? So what is the correct amount of money in fraction form? Well, it can either be a tenth or a hundredth, because money, you can't do a 57 like that. That's not okay. And anytime you put a 1 in the denominator, that tells me that they're not cut up. So this is actually $43 right here. 43 $1 bills is what this is saying. So you have a quarter, which is 25. I have a dime, 35. I have a nickel, 40. So 25 plus 5 plus 10 is 40, and then 3 little cents. So I have 43 cents. Now, luckily, they're all 43 cents. So even if you did your math wrong up here, you just really have to know how you would write a fraction with money. Well, in fraction, cents is in hundredths. So it takes 100 pennies to make a dollar. So when you're counting for money, it's out of 100. So 43 hundredths is correct. Crystal has 81 hundredths. And actually, if you didn't know that, you could have looked anywhere on the page and saw that they're using hundredths to represent money here. Crystal has 81 hundredths of the dollar. Which of the following could be the coins Crystal has? 81. So which ones add up to 81? Well, I know I'm going to have one little penny left over after you count. So here we go. Penny, 1 penny, 21 pennies. So that'd be okay. And a penny. So let's go ahead and see what we got. So we have 3/4. That's 25, 50, 75 plus 10 is 85. We've already busted, and this ends up being 86 cents. 2/4 is 50. 6 nickels is 30. 50 plus 30 is 80, plus 1 more. This is 81 cents, so B is correct. Let's make sure there's not another correct answer. 2/4 again is 50 and 21 cents, so this is 71 cents. 1/4 is 25, and then we're going to have 4 dimes, so I have to count by 10 4 times. 25, 35, 45, 55, 65 plus a nickel would be 71. They actually have 2 71 cents here to throw you off. And so B is the correct answer. Number 3, Joel gives 1/3. So we're not talking about money here. 1/3 of his baseball cards to his sister. Which fraction is equivalent? That's a fancy word for equal to 1/3. Remember, to find any equivalent fraction, all you have to do is the same thing to the bottom as you do to the top. So if you start off with 1/3, I can multiply the top and the bottom by 2. I could do a 3, a 4, a 5, but whatever I do, it has to be the same to give me an equal fraction. So I'm going to start with A, and I'm going to set it up. And another way you could do it is you could cross multiply and see if the sides are equal. We learned this before spring break. 3 times 3 is 9. 5 times 1 is 5. These are not equal. This side is bigger, so this is not right. 8/9. Well, I know that's not going to be equal just by using my benchmark fraction of a half. That was another strategy we learned before spring break. This is smaller than half. This is way bigger than half, because if you were to cut 9 in half, you would get somewhere between a 4 and a 5, 4.5. So this is bigger than half, so this is not equal. And the 4/10, that's really close to half. So why don't I see? If I multiply the bottom and the top by the same number, I should be able to get the same. So if I start with 1 and I want to make a 4, that means I got to times 4. 1 times 4 is 4. 3 times 4 is 12. No, it didn't work. Any of these strategies will work, but this is the correct answer, because if you were to times 2 to the top, to the bottom, you would get 2/6. And number 4, Penelope bakes pretzels. She salts 3/8 of the pretzels. Which fraction is equivalent, big fancy word for equal, to 3/8? So if you have 3/8, I know this is less than half, but just by a little bit, because 4 is half of 8. So when I'm looking here, I know this is not going to work. And you can look around and you can actually see, like, this is bigger than a half because 10 is half. So that's not going to be okay. That's not going to be okay. So let me just start here and see where I can work from. So 3 becomes a 9. How does 3 become a 9? Well, 3 times 3 is 9. Does 8 times 3 equal 24? If so, then you are the same. Here, let's look at the last one just to make sure. 3 becomes a 3. Well, it's already a 3, so just times 1. 8 times 1, oh, that doesn't work out so well, so that is not correct. Remember, the rule with equivalent fractions is you're going to multiply the top and the bottom by the same number, and then you should be able to figure it out. Or you can cross multiply, or you can use a benchmark in your head to use to figure out which one would be correct. And which decimal is shown by this model? Well, I know this is an array of 10 by 10, so this is 100 pieces. You can count them if you want, but 10 times 10 is 100, and we only have 1. That means we have 1 out of 100 pieces. 1/100ths. My words tells me that which one is correct. I'm looking for 1/100ths, which is D. And last, Mr. Guzman has 100 cows on his dairy farm. Of the cows, 57 are Holstein. Which decimal represents the portion of cows that are Holstein? So we have 57 out of 100. This is the fraction form. Now my mouth will tell me the answer, 57/100ths. So I come over here and well, this says 57 wholes. No way. 57/100ths, which means I need a decimal point. The first one is your tenths, and the second one is your hundredths. So I need that, which is B. So today, our mini lesson is going to be on adding decimals. And adding decimals, and actually we're going to go into subtraction of decimals, which is a 5th grade standard, but it's the very, very beginning of 5th grade. So when we're doing our review for 5th grade, that's when we're going to touch on it, or we might even just decide to touch on it this week instead of next week. So adding decimals. Some important things I want you to remember when adding decimals. Actually, there's only one big thing I need you to remember, and it's going to end up being our words of the day. When you're adding decimals, you have to add the place value. For instance, if I have 1/10 and I have 1/100ths, the rule that I've been telling you for quite a while is you line them up. You make sure you line them up nice and straight, because that will get you your place value okay. Now, if you don't line them up and you have 1/10 and you have 1/100ths, it could look like 1 plus 1. It could look like 1 plus 1, and you could tell me 2 is the answer. Now, I want to make sure I make this very clear because in the years past, I've actually had kids do this very often. 1/10. 1/10. Well, here's a visual. Here's 1 whole. Here's 1/10. Now, 1/100th would be if I took this little tenth and I cut it up into 10 pieces again. It would be tiny. And that's why I keep using this as a representation for you to see. This over here, these are all tenths. These little tiny pieces are all hundredths. It takes 10 of these to make 1 of these. So 10 of these equals 1 of these because this is this just cut up again, if you can see that. So when you're dealing with decimals, it is super duper important that you line up the decimals and you're just adding the place values. Here's another way this might make you understand it better. 1/10 is the same thing as 10 cents. Okay? 1 penny is the same thing as 1/100th of a dollar here. So if you were to say, well, this one plus this one equals 2, you would be incorrect because this is 10 and this is 1. This is 1/10 of a dollar. This is 100th of a dollar. They are both 1 coin, but this is worth 10 cents and this is worth 1 cent. So it is super important. And actually, if you can just remember this one thing, you will ace this section. Adding decimals, you line them up so that the place values will stay where they're supposed to. You cannot add ones, like let's say we had 2 wholes and 1/10. And let's say over here, we just had, let me start over, 2 wholes and 1/10, and let's just say we had 1 whole here. And maybe you want to put the 1 over here because you want to line up the numbers, but that's not going to be okay. If I have $2.10 and somebody gives me one more dollar, I'm not going to have $2.11. If someone gives me 1 whole, that means that goes into the ones place. This is the tenths and this is the hundredths. So you keep your place value the same, and it's very easy if you always just think, where's my decimal point, and line it up. There was a song last week that you were, or maybe it was the week before, you were supposed to listen to, and it simply just was called Line Them Up, Line Them Up, Line Them Up, and there you were doing a whole bunch of lining up the decimals. Lining up the decimals will also help you compare greater than, less than, or equal to, and it's also important for adding or subtracting. So when you're adding decimals, you line them up. So if I was to have 7 13/100ths, and I wanted to add together 4/100ths, I need to line them up. So my decimal point tells me my starting point. Always start from here. You got wholes on this side, you got parts on this side. So line them up with this is your starting point. Your first step is going to come from your decimal point. So here I have 7 wholes. Now my decimal point, and I have 13/100ths. Here I have no wholes, but I have no tenths either, and I have 4/100ths. So now you can see if you line them up, line them up, line them up, line them up, with the decimal point being like the officer here, keeping them all in a straight line, now you can add your decimals. That is the only rule, is to stick your place values together. You cannot add your ones to your 100ths. That does not work. That's crossing the lines. Crossing the lines are bad. You have to stay in your place value line. So every digit that you would add up in this section would have to be hundredths. Every digit you add up in this place value section would have to be a tenths. And this is your wholes. You could even have more if you want. It doesn't matter. Just make sure you put it where it goes. Writing it correctly is key to making this easy. Very, very easy. Okay, now for a few examples. They are going to give you numbers that are in fraction format or decimal format. But that's why we went through it so heavily so that you can know your place value spot. So when you are doing this, just remember your decimal point separates the wholes from your tenths and your hundredths. Do not mess them up. The very first one in your parts is your tenths. So here it says 7/10. Let me make that larger for you. Wrong way. Here we have find 7/10 plus 5/100. You cannot tell me this is 12. These are different place values. 7/10 is the same thing as 7 dimes. 5/100 is the same thing as 5 pennies. When you add 7 of these and 5 of these, well, you're going to get 75. You are not going to get 12. Also, you can think of it as this: 7/10, 5/100, which means I gotta put a 0 in the tenths because it doesn't have any tenths. It could have had a tenth. It could have had a 15, which would mean that would have been 1. That would have been 10 plus 5/100, but it doesn't. It does not have that. So 7/10 plus 5/100. The easiest way to do it, if it's a fraction, remember, whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. Whatever you do to the top, you have to do to the bottom. So the easiest way is to find an equivalent fraction. I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by 10, which means I just add a 0. 7 times 10, 70. 10 times 10, 100. Now you can see they have the same denominator. We worked on this like in January, adding fractions, and you left the denominator alone as long as it's the same. If it isn't the same, you can't just add it. You have to make it the same and then leave it alone. So this ends up being 70/100. And the 5 doesn't change because it's already in hundredths form. So this is looking like 70 plus 5, 75/100, which would be 3/4 if you were thinking about money. We're not doing this whole paper. I'm only going to do a few on this one so that we can also use this for tomorrow's review. We have 1/10 and 11/100. So 11 tells me this is already a 10 plus a 1 equals 11. So this is actually 1/10 or 10/100 plus 1/100. 1/10 looks like this in decimal form. 11/100 looks like this in decimal form. If I was to write it on my handy dandy chart here, 1/10 means I put a 1 in the 10th place. 1/10 means I put a 1 in the 10th place. 11/100 means I have to put 11 in the hundredths place, and I can't do that. You're not allowed to have more than one digit, so he goes to the next column. Send him on up and over. So this is 11/100, and this is 1/10. And when you add 11/100 and 1/10 together, you might want to say this. We'll just watch and see if you can figure out where my mistake is. Oh, wrong way. You might want to say that 11 plus hundredths plus 1/10 is 12 hundredths. And that would be wrong because when you line up the place value, 1/10 and 11/100, now you can add that together. Nothing plus 1 is 1, and then 1 plus 1 is 2. So the answer would be 21/100. So my mistake here was I did not take in consideration place value. The 10th place is much different than the hundredths. 1 goes in the 10th, 11 goes in the hundredths. So it ends up being 21/100, not 12. And the easiest way to do this, the shortest, easiest, quickest way would have been whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So let's go ahead and make this into hundredths by multiplying the bottom by 10 and then the top by 10, and then 10 plus 11 is 21. Now decimal point, it's already in the correct way where you can just put it right there in the place value chart and you can line it up. So our word for the day, both words of the day, actually 3 words of the day, is going to be line it up. Decimal points, in order to add them, you must line them up. So if you have 6 plus, then you can just do your regular addition that you have been doing for many, many, many years. 6 plus 5 is 11. Regroup that 1. 4 plus 1 is 6. Line it up. Adding and subtracting, you line it up. So do not forget, here you go. Line it up. There are our words of the day. Line it up. This is super important. So I want everybody to hear today's words of the day. When working with decimals, with adding or subtracting, you line it up. Line that decimal point up. All right, my friends, you have some Khan videos and activities to do today. You have no worksheet. It's just the Khan videos and activities. And the word of the day can be written on the sheet, or you can do that private messaging, which some of you have been doing, and that is fine too. And there they are. So I shall talk with you guys tomorrow, and I hope you have a fantastic day. And don't forget, when adding decimals, line it up. That decimal point must be lined up. Bye-bye.